Start by thanking our partner, Resilience Initiative. And I think you guys already know this, but just a reminder that there's a lot you can get out of this partnership. So, one-on-one coaching, of course, the Fundraising Fridays, but please reach out to Michelle if you have any questions about other resources and other things available to you. Definitely want to make sure you're getting the most out of it. Progressive Multiplier is hosting today's training. And I know you guys already know a lot about that great organization, but just a reminder that there's a great resource for you as well. And sharing a few of the team members. Kathy is with me today. She's going to be monitoring the chat,
Hello.
answering questions. Kathy, thank you so much for being here. So if you guys need any help and I don't notice, Kathy will be helping you out in the chat. Okay, well, let me introduce myself. I'm Emily Davis. I'm in Falls Church, just outside of DC. I've been fundraising in this area for about 20 years, and I actually came out of volunteer management. So I really came out of asking people for their time and attention and moving into asking people for some funds. And so I see a lot of overlap there, right? People who want to give you their time and attention, people who want to be volunteers are often your best donors. Outside of work, I am a trivia enthusiast. I met my husband playing trivia. We are both kind of nerdy. I have one daughter and I am her Girl Scout troop leader, and we are prepping for our first overnight trip. So really hoping for that spring weather because it's going to be a little rustic out there. Well, today we are going to learn a couple great things. We're going to talk about what are the trends that we've seen from some past election cycles, and can we use those to think ahead for what might happen this year with the mid-year or the midterm, excuse me. Thinking about our organizations, where's there some opportunity, maybe where's some vulnerability, and think about how you might want to resource allocate as you're looking ahead for fundraising this year. And then also think about some of these great strategies that you've already been talking about for IRG to really think about, okay, how can we maybe change things up a little this year? What are we going to do the same to really help with our overall fundraising plan? So before we get started, I feel like this is a great place to start. Throw me an emoji. Just how are you feeling about fundraising this year with the midterms coming up? There's some fun ones you can choose, but how you feeling? Yep. Yep. Oh, I like the fingers crossed. That's good. That's solid. Valid. Valid. Okay, so we've got some concern. We've got some question marks. Oh, we got some thinking. I love that one. Great. Great. All right, well let's dive in and hopefully we'll feel even better at the end of this. Okay, so we're starting with just a little bit of a pop quiz because I didn't know this before I started researching, but there's a lot of governors who are going to be elected in 2026. So, what do you think? Less than 10? 10 states getting new governors? 25 to 40? Or is every state in the union going to get a new one? Oh, we already got a guess for B, 25 to 40. Solid Bs. All right. All right. Okay, we got an A, we got a less than 10. Didn't trick anybody with the 50. So it is between 25 and 40. Great guess, everybody. Good job. So I'm going to share a little bit about what does the midterms look like right now? Where are we electing and how might it impact you locally, statewide, and across the country? So a lot of the Senate is up, 35 seats. Every single member of the House of Representatives is up. Of course, some are more competitive than others. And then we have 36 states as well as three territories are going to get new governors. So that's a lot. That's a lot going on. Not to mention there's quite a few mayors in pretty large cities, including here in DC, and that'll be a really big change for the local landscape. So wherever you are across the country and wherever your donors are, there's probably an election coming up that is going to, at the very least, take attention, if not change things locally. I thought this was a really great graphic that AP News put out. And this kind of shows you, okay, not just where are the elections, but when are the elections. So whether it's runoff, primary, there's kind of a lot going on. And just to be aware of, it's not even just November, depending on where you are and where your donors are. There may be some other times throughout the year that are going to take a little bit of attention, and we should just be aware of that. So I want to go into a little bit of what have we learned recently? And of course, every election is different. Midterms are different than presidential, but we have been paying attention to how do donors act in an election year and is it different? So, probably not to be surprising, the political climate can certainly sway our donor behavior. People maybe are paying more attention. Maybe they're paying more attention to some of the reasons why your cause is so important. Maybe things are top of mind. They're hearing more things about it. That could be really good. But it can also be a crowded calendar. Maybe they're getting more communication. Maybe they're seeing things on TV. Maybe they're getting more ads, more texts. That can be a bit of a mixed bag. Again, raising attention, but how do you cut through all of that? So, what we want to talk about today is can we tap into that energy? Can we talk about things that align already with our mission? Not stretching too far, but talking about things that align with us. And can we tap into people's energy and maybe into their frustration a little bit in order to help us with our fundraising? So, we'll touch on all of this today. Something that I found really interesting, and there's been some studies on this, do donors give more, less, or the same in an election year? And basically, what the research is telling us is that there's three different ways that donors approach giving to a candidate, giving in an election year. There's the substitute donors. They basically shift. They take their money from their general cause pot and they put it into a candidate pot, and they might move some or most or all of it. There's also complementary donors, and these are donors who, when they're feeling engaged, when they're looking at a candidate, when they're thinking about an election, they actually give more to a candidate and to their causal giving. And then you have independent donors who actually don't change. They give the same to all their causes, and then they add on political. So what I think is really interesting is what percentage does each of these? So what the research finds is most donors don't tie their giving to a candidate to their giving to their causes. They're completely separate in their minds, which is potentially very good news. They're not taking from one pocket to give to the other. About 4 to 5% of donors do move from giving to a cause to giving to a candidate, and that can be very challenging. And we'll talk about why that might happen more in certain areas. But you do have 12% who increase, and that can be a really great opportunity for us. So just to keep in mind, a lot of your donors don't see this as I'm going to stop giving to causes and move everything over. It's either independent or it's an addition, and that's just good news to be thinking about as you think about this year. Something we do need to think about though is are we going to get lost in the shuffle? You think about how many texts you got. I certainly know I did still to this day, but certainly leading up to elections, am I getting bombarded with emails? Am I just kind of turning off because there's so much out there? So, how do we make sure our message is really interesting and people want to pay attention to it? We're going to talk a little bit about maybe adjusting schedules, whether that's away from election or towards, just to try to get people's attention, but also thinking about what makes our messaging stand out. Is this a time to be a little more creative? Is this a time to tell stories? Is this a time to just try to stand out in a way so that people do pay attention to us? We are going to talk a little bit about can we tie to trending topics? Now, the news moves really fast these days. That's very challenging. But can we say, oh, this is really on top of people's mind? That's close to our mission. We can talk about it. But please keep that in mind. Another piece of good news is that giving to candidates is a fraction of giving to causes. Even now, when the last election cycle, we saw the highest giving to candidates. We also saw the highest giving to causes. And election giving, candidate giving is still a very small percentage of giving. So something to keep in mind that yes, this can be a challenging landscape, but we are seeing people step forward and if they're giving to candidates, still giving to our causes, which is a really, really good thing to think about. One statistic I want to draw your attention to is down at the bottom here. What we're seeing, whether it's called rage giving or surge giving, people giving around elections, really having a reaction either before the election or due to the turnout and giving specifically to civil rights, community development, and advocacy groups. So again, that can be a good news story for us is that people are thinking about the ways they want their communities to be different and who they trust to make those changes. And that can be a really good news story for us as long as we can communicate and get their attention in the middle of everything else. To be a little nerdy for a minute here, and I know you all have talked about this quite a bit, we want to make sure that we're tracking and using good data and doing good reporting. If you make some shifts this year, if you change how you communicate, if you move your calendar, please make sure you're documenting that so that you know for either the next election cycle or just for the future what worked and what didn't. Don't assume that your reporting is going to be exactly the same. You may have to acknowledge we moved this, we shifted this, we had an opportunity to jump on a trending topic, and so we did. Just make sure you're keeping track of this because in a year or two, you may not remember, and this is all really great data for your future fundraising efforts. It's also really great to see how are your donors reacting? Where are they going? Are you seeing your donors be more complimentary? Are you seeing them do the exact same thing? This will help you get to know your donors, which will help you in future years, whether there's an election or not. I mentioned this a little bit already, but just be thinking about what issues are maybe a good space for you to be with the knowledge that you don't need to be everywhere, right? We live in an ecosystem with a lot of great causes, a lot of great organizations. Please don't feel like you need to be in every single conversation. But if there are certain things that come up that are central to your mission, this might be a good time for you to step forward and say, we've been working in this area for a long time. We care about this all the time. Here's the work that we're doing day in and day out to really make a difference. I do think it's smart to be ready for these opportunities, have some messaging pre-approved, maybe regardless of how local, state, or national elections might shake out. How would you communicate depending on who is elected, if there's a runoff, all these things, just so you're ready to go and you can be really nimble. And then keep an eye on the trending topics and what's kind of popping in your area. So I'm going to take down the slides for a minute just so we can chat with each other. I'd love for you all to come off mute and just kind of tell me, where are you seeing your opportunities? Where are you seeing your vulnerabilities? What that I've shared is sounding like that could be a really great space for you to be, or you're feeling kind of nervous about. Michael, please go ahead.
I would just say like I'm in the first quarter of my development
Yeah.
job with my organization. We have a C3 arm and a C4 arm, and like
Mhm.
we are looking at, you know, what quarter three looks like,
Yeah.
what our
Mhm.
states of impact looks like. And our C3 is funded,
Mhm.
right? But our C4, what we are focusing fundraisers on, everybody who's in Miami, let me know. Uh, we want to make sure that we have our states of impact fully funded
Mhm.
and, a non-linear quarter that has sharp spikes and,
Yep.
you know, we are trying to nail down what our GOTV budget is and all of our
Mhm.
advocacy work and like, yeah, really trying to do that when we don't know how much our C4 arm is really going to raise. So that's really what our
Yeah.
starting point is. And
Yeah. And
our
how do
vice
you?
chair of our C4 is also a national organizing director. He's sitting here scratching, and our co-founder, and he's scratching his head like, hmm. And I'm like, let's go, schedule some more fundraisers. So
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's really challenging is how do you plan when you just don't know what you've got? Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Valerie, I'd love to hear from you.
Sorry about that. Lost my screen. Hi, everybody. I'm Valerie. I work at Rise Up Together, and we do gender equity work internationally. And so I think the attention of donors, we're definitely in the bucket where things will probably be separate, and maybe we'll get a lift from other politically involved folks. But we are quite small, and our budgets just will not compete. We can barely compete with large other nonprofits, and then on top of that, the political space, and we're launching a new program. So our biggest concern is just being seen,
Yep.
especially during election time. But the opportunity is we have a very relevant sector and interested
Mhm.
donor base.
That's great. That's great. I appreciate that you're kind of looking at both sides of where's the opportunity, but then also where's the potential pitfall. It's great. Yeah. Yeah. If anyone would like to share in the chat that maybe doesn't feel comfortable coming off audio, please feel free. But I'd love to hear from anybody else.
I can share. So for
Yeah.
us, I think something that comes to mind in terms of just like the saturation of like messaging that's happening. I think particularly because we were sorry. I have so many ideas coming to my head and I can't speak them.
This is the place for them. We'll take all your ideas.
So, where I work with Inner City Struggle, we're in the east side of Los Angeles, and during election years, we do civic engagement work to educate folks in the community, which is predominantly Latino, around like what's on the ballot. And I think with the oversaturation of like messaging that comes from candidates,
Mm,
people tend to feel like overwhelmed and confused. So I think we have been working, and we do see ourselves as like a trusted messenger.
mhm.
So I think really working, or our communications team does like an amazing job of just like being like culturally relevant, and all the work that they've done to start building that trust with folks, I think is important. And so I think there's an opportunity to really just like increase our visibility during election time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And it sounds like the comms team is kind of like prepped, ready to go, has already got things ready so that you can go out and try and do the work on the ground. That's great. That's really great. Okay. Well, the next thing I want to talk about is calendar and kind of moving some stuff around. So I appreciate, I think that sounds topical. If you guys think of anything else, please throw it in the chat. And I'd love to hear it. Okay. Did that come back up okay? All right, great. Oop, there we go. So, next thing I want to talk about is just thinking about the calendar. And kind of what I think I heard is some of us want to move away from being too close to the election when everyone's oversaturated and when everyone's hearing too much. And some of us might want to move toward it, right? And kind of align what we're talking about to say, this is what the election is about. Here's where we're related. So, just some things to think about. I showed you that slide of here's where all the elections are in the country. So, where are your supporters? Are you super, super local and it's really the local election that's going to impact your donors? Are you more regional, statewide, national? What dates are maybe on the calendar in addition to the day itself? In Virginia, we have primaries, that sort of a thing. And are there large events that tend to happen for you in October and November? Are those still really well timed because people will be thinking about it, or do you want to shift a little bit back or forth? So I want to show you an example of this. This is the greater DC area, which is where I'm doing a lot of my work, just to kind of show you what our calendar looks like. So we have a special election in November, or I beg your pardon, April, and that's all around redistricting. And that's a very hot button issue. People have pretty strong feelings about it. There's a lot of communication going on around that. So even though the Virginia just got our governor, April is going to be a really big push, and we're already seeing a ton of saturation around that. Then in June, DC has a new mayor. Huge. That's going to take over again. At the same time, Maryland has a governor in a primary election. And so I'm in Northern Virginia, but Virginia, DC, Maryland, we're all kind of in a big circle together. All of our media is going to be overwhelmed by this. And then we go into August, Virginia primary. I don't expect that to be as loud, honestly. I think the summer will be quieter. And then November, we have that general election. So depending on, which organization I'm working with, I would probably encourage us, hey, let's leave April alone, let's leave June alone, let's move things later in the year. But again, if my organization is super involved with elections or works really closely with the mayor's office, it might make more sense to be nearby. So just wanted to just throw that out as an example of, again, it's not just your immediate area, but where are your donors located? What's the media landscape? How much information are they trying to take in all at once? The other thing to throw out, and we talked about this a little earlier when we were talking about, are your donors more likely to give more, the same, or less? They've done some studies around how competitive is your election area. So in 2024, they found that donors in swing states were more likely to kind of turn off because they were getting so much communication, they were getting so much targeted communication. They even did some studies around people in swing states closing email when they saw a political message, just opting out entirely. They were just done. And that effect, that tune out, can harm us, right? Because we're trying to get their attention. We're trying to get them to pay attention to our cause and engage in some way. So just be aware of the more competitive, your local election is, whether that's mayor, governor, or something else, you may have more of a challenge holding people's attention because everyone's vying for their same attention and it's just finite. Um, I wanted to throw up grant funding, and I know that that landscape has changed so much recently. But something for us all to be aware of is transitions at the local, state, and federal level can really impact how those grant funds are distributed. So if you are receiving funding, be aware that you might see some more hiccups than recent. And if you're not, you may have some more opportunities. I think in general, we're all really aware of grant funding changing so much and being aware of that cliff that's coming up. But I did want to mention and kind of voice something that we're all probably seeing, which is that grant funding continues to be a little challenging right now. So,
Emily, we had
uh,
an
oh,
interesting question
please.
from Drew about navigating the challenge of donors moving towards C3 or primary purpose C4 from pressure from the current administration.
Ooh.
I can't
Mhm.
remember if you're going to talk about that.
Um, I'm sorry, could you state that again? I think I misunderstood you.
Oh, if you want to talk about the pressure some donors feel because of our current administration of being
Mhm.
fearful of doing things other than C3 or
Yep.
primary C4 funds.
Yep. No, that's great. Here, I'm gonna bring this down because I also want to chat about the trends. So I'd love to hear from you all on that. I know we've certainly seen some donors who are not sure what's going on with taxes, not sure what's going on with the general area. And I think also we as organizations are feeling some concern about how much can we advocate, what can we say, and where can we say it. So that back and forth I've seen play out quite a bit. But I'd love to hear from you all. And I know, Michael, you have shared that you kind of have two different areas of your organization. But if anyone wants to share kind of what your experience has been, either with those trends or with kind of the C3, C4 split, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think I can go. My name is
Great.
Jerome Stutz and I'm with Red Wine and Blue. I think we've just overall seen a trend ever since the
Yeah.
2024 election of a movement where donors previously didn't care either way if it was C3 or
Mm.
C4. Now they're very adamant about not wanting to contribute C4 funds. And if they do, being very hesitant to
Mm.
have anything political either in the proposal or in
Yep.
any sort of conversation. They're really trying to stay away from that. And it's creating a challenge because oftentimes like ultimately what they want to get out of the grant is very C4 electoral in nature, but they're only willing to fund work that is C3.
I'm seeing a lot of head nods. I think I've definitely experienced that. Yeah. Yeah. Kathy, did you want to share? I know you had a resource from your training yesterday that
Mhm.
might be a little bit in this realm.
Yeah, for folks who are not already familiar with Alliance for Justice, they have an arm called Boulder Advocacy that has really clear guidance around like for organizations C3 and C4, what you're allowed to do, how to stay compliant, all of those things. And they also have resources for foundations, philanthropy on that side. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat. Let me pull it up.
Thank you for that. And I know it's always a strange space because, we want obviously, we need the support for what we need it for, and we want our donors to be partners. And you want your proposal to be an honest reflection of what they're funding and where that funding is going. So it does put you in a weird space, but I wonder if there's some space there for communications or light light training of our donors of like, here's a resource that might be valuable to you. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Um, well, I also wanted to give some space just to say like, this is a lot of information. What else have you all seen? Meredith, please go ahead.
So Ani Boujou, my name is Meredith McGeezy. I run McGuatch Inc., which is all over Michigan. We're a tribally incorporated, but I'm not run by a tribal council. I always have to put that out there. So I think that that is also really hard for us as a native nonprofit. We have a C3 and a C4. It's really, really difficult because of the lack of information about tribal folks.
Ooh,
And so
okay.
we really, really struggle. Just with funders understanding what it means to be tribal in Michigan. So, like, if you
Hmm.
look at the census, you're only going to see about 63,000 people who identify as Indigenous on the cover value. But really, when you look into how many people identify as Indigenous in another race, it's more like 250,000. And so our constituency is everywhere.
Mhm.
but to try to educate donors in a way, because anytime someone says the tribe, they are talking about a tribal government and not actually about tribal people. So, like, for funders that I'm reaching in the Detroit area to do voter education, they're like, oh, there's no tribes here. And I'm like, actually, like, you
Mhm.
have 68,000 people who identify as Indigenous. So that's where I struggle, is just the lack of education surrounding tribal folks and in Michigan um, with funding, which also puts me in a really unique situation because we're the only ones that do it. Like
Mhm.
there's no other C3 or C4 that does voter education, voter engagement. And then also with funding, because the majority of what we do is rooted in cultural practices, like trying to get messaging to funders about how like a copper pounding is actually also like democracy because we weren't allowed to do it until the passage of the Native American Religious Freedom Act in 1978. So, like, even having that conversation that us being present and doing things is democracy. So, that's where I struggle is um, the lack of education about what it means to be an Indigenous person in Michigan with funders. So, so
Yeah.
that's where I really struggle with some of that is I feel like I do a lot of funder education
Mhm.
in an
Mhm.
election year.
Mhm. Which I do think is hugely valuable, but very time consuming. Very time consuming. Yeah. Yeah. Nat, please go ahead.
Yeah, something that we're noticing is that in 2024, I'm from the Human Trafficking Legal Center. So in 2024, there was a lot of more people giving more and larger because of what was coming. Project 2025 kind of gave us a blueprint of what we knew was coming down the pipeline. But now, where we are now, it's kind of a sense of hope. We're like, oh, maybe we can get more better people in Congress and we'll be able to actually make some change. And so they're not being as motivated by this sense of impending doom, but more kind of a let's wait and see how these
Mhm.
elections turn out. And then maybe I won't need to give as much or as heavily because change might be coming. I'm curious if
Oh,
anyone else has similar senses.
I don't know how firewalled we are. Uh, but lending from my experience on the Harris Walls campaign in Georgia as an organizer, um, the first thing they told us to do was to educate about Project 2025.
mhm.
And within that message was you have to identify the stakes of your advocacy, right? For that moment, it was recruiting volunteers, but the ultimate tools are to engage folks in your why, and not just in your why, but how their participation in your why builds the thing they need,
Yeah.
right? As funders, as volunteers, as programmatic side, right? And that's all really fundamental from the programmatic side. But when you're talking to funders, typically they're so busy or they have their time is not in the same value tier as their, funding. And we have to create bite-sized ways to get that why
Mhm.
to our funder, and not just to our funder, but to like the wider network of potential funders that exist both foundationally and, you know, uh individually. So I only have been in this picture and my role for about 8 weeks. But the
Mhm.
most
Mhm.
important thing I've learned is people don't have time.
Yeah.
Like they just don't have time to engage with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Limited time, limited resources, limited attention. I think that's right. I think that's right. Nat, your comment was really interesting to me, this idea of like, I want change, but I'm also going to stand back a little bit and see if it happens without me. That is so interesting. And almost the opposite of kind of this surge giving, rage giving we saw more 2 years ago, right? Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. These have been great additions. I really appreciate everyone being willing to share. And I see the chat we're sharing as well, but I really appreciate all your comments. I'm going to move forward, but please feel free to stop and add more information, and we'll have some more time for discussion as well. Okay. So we're going to go back to, I think, some of the other conversations that you guys have had in these groups around independent revenue generation and what strategies maybe always make sense or may make a special sense this year as we're looking at all these trends and kind of these expectations around attention and time and how can we best use our resources. So some of these things I know you already know, but it's always good to remind ourselves. We're trying to diversify people and money we organize, and that's going to help us create not just power, but durable power, right? To keep moving forward the way that we know we need to. And it's all about resiliency, right? It's all about making sure we can expand, that we can invest in our people, that we can connect to community. And, we've talked a little bit about this, like philanthropy can be a little fickle, right? Like the funder changes their mind, the grant changes. We want to make sure that our organization and our cause moves forward. And so we want to be resilient, we want to be diversified, we want to be moving forward even as things boom or bust. We want to feel good about what we can do. So, um, what's IRG? We're just fundraising outside of institutional sources, right? So that can be individual donors, events. We've talked about that already. Planned giving, always important. We want to be ready. We want to be agile. We want to be able to scale, and we want to be accountable, right? All of these great, really important things. Never a bad thing to remind ourselves of why and how. So, a couple things to think about as we're thinking about, are we making changes this year? Are we not? What independent revenue is going to align with your story and your value? What's right for you? What might interest your donor base, right? You know your donors the best. What do you have the skill sets for? What do you have the staffing for? And what are the things that, we already talked about educating our funders. What are the things that we can explain quickly, move forward, not add more burden to our staff to educate and communicate? And then what does your donor base have capacity for? Are they ready for planned giving? Maybe yes, maybe no. Where are they right now? I think the biggest thing I want to share today is that we need to stay consistent. We need to continue to do our fundraising. We need to continue to communicate to our funders. And we need to make sure that we don't stop fundraising or take a huge long break just because there's a lot of other people in the space. We want to continue sharing our work, emphasizing why we matter. And I think making sure that if you're looking at your organization's communications during the midterm, before, after, it's clearly the same message, right? You might tweak, you might communicate a specific story, but you want to make sure that donors can see who you are, what you stand for, and why you're relevant and why they want to be a part of you. That you are vital during the election, before and after. And I think that's really important. Um, Again, calendar timing is everything. And we just don't really know. Even with the research, every election's a little different, and certainly a midterm is different than presidential. And as we all know, the last couple years have been really unusual. And so we're learning a lot as we go. One thing I want to throw out is this idea of spreading risk. So, as you're looking at your calendar, as you're looking at your fundraisers, as you're looking at your campaigns, maybe doing more smaller as opposed to one big, right? Like spreading that risk out. So if there's a big bump in communication or if there's something unexpected, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You can continue to communicate and try a couple different things and see how they land. We did talk already about, do you move your campaigns earlier, later? Do you align? Do you not? That's completely up to your organization, what feels right for you and your donors. But again, if you try a couple different things, you can spread that risk out, you can learn, you can document, and you can change this year, let alone in next year. So just some things to think about as you're looking at the calendar. Um, I do want to encourage you, and I'm sure you already are, but diversifying your communications, right? We know people are getting a lot of texts and emails. This is a great time to make sure you've got direct mail, paper letters, postcards going on, online and offline. If people are kind of tuning out because they're getting so much online communication, this is a great time to be doing handwritten notes or other ways of reaching out. It's also a good time to just try different things. And I'm going to remind you of, I think, a recent training you all had about messaging frames. So, are you addressing your audience's questions? Are you sharing information, impact, risk? Why does this matter? Why does it matter now? And what's the action they can take? So just really making sure that you're using all this great information, you're using all your great skills, and we're continuing to fundraise the way that we know works for our donors. Um, Storytelling, always very important. But I think this is especially a good time to storytell. There's so much going on, and we know it's just going to ramp up between now and November. So, how can you tell your story? How can you showcase what you're doing and why it matters? Remembering that people always connect to stories more than they connect to statistics or really anything else. They want to hear your story about your organization and the people you serve, always reminding them what their dollars do, why it's important, and what the impact is. Thanking your donors, but also reminding them why you need their continued support and why they can't be on the sidelines, right? Like we mentioned earlier, this isn't a wait and see time. We need you to step forward and support us now so we can continue to do this work that's so important. Talked a little bit already about having content ready, talking to your comms team, being ready, because storytelling does take a little while, right? Getting the permissions, getting the photos, getting everything ready to go. So, in your infinite free time, as I know you all have, what do you have ready to go? So, if you did need to shift and you wanted to tell a story about a specific um, topic that's in the news, everything's ready to go. You have it. It's not necessarily constantly creating something new. Sometimes it's just timing that wonderful story that you have. Hey, we do this. This is something that's really important to us. This is a way for us to be a part of the news cycle, but not necessarily have to recreate the wheel. Here's a story that we can tell in a really timely fashion. I originally had this slide titled Rage Giving, which I think a couple years ago was probably more accurate. Now we're kind of shifting to this concept of surge giving. And it's not necessarily just around the election, right? We know the Supreme Court is coming out with some new rulings in the next couple of months. So it's really just this general, as people are feeling compelled to give, are you ready for that? And this is all this good work that you already are doing. So, do you have a donation pop up on your website? Is your donation form working properly? Test it, retest it, make sure it's easy to use. When people feel compelled to give you money, it's easy to do so and they want to do so. Tell your stories, keep posting, keep sharing your impact, your effectiveness. Here's what we're doing and why it matters. And make sure that your, misspelled, but solicitations really connect to what you're going to do next. So here's why we're fundraising. Here's our next steps. Here's how we continue to move forward. I think the last point's the most important. We shouldn't be afraid of asking. Even if there's a lot going on in the ecosystem, it's still important to ask for people to volunteer, ask for people to sign petitions. We need you. We need our community. People want to be involved. People really do want to step forward. So let's make sure that we're asking them. So the election's going to happen, and then we're going to have the post-election time. So, let's all be ready for that. Let's think about how we can communicate honestly and openly with our supporters. Regardless of the outcome, we want to tell them how that impacts your work. How does that move you forward? How does that create more challenges? What are you as an organization going to continue to do with your help? And I think a point here that's really interesting is if the results feel negative to you and your donors, that's okay to voice, right? It's okay to be honest and open and transparent with our supporters and let them feel unfortunately defeated if they need to. Then we can acknowledge our hurt and then we can move forward into hope. But I think it's important we don't miss that step and really allow ourselves and our supporters to feel every range of emotion and then say, okay, how are we going to move forward together? Are we changing how we move forward? It's continuing either way, good, bad, right? We're going to move forward and we're going to do it together. I really like this slide, and I think it's been in a previous training. Be yourselves, be your organization. You know who you are, you know who your donors are. You want to continue to communicate. And again, be transparent. If there's bad news, share it honestly. If there's good news, celebrate together. But don't change yourselves to fit into this moment. You are who you are and your donors support you in that. So continue to be your true and authentic selves. So I'm going to take down the slides so we can talk a little bit more. I see a couple things in the chat. Um, I would love for you all to share just kind of how this is hitting and if anything is going to change how you move forward this year.
Well, I already sent my ED a message that we should start adding petitions to our digital email campaigns.
I
I
love
think
that.
that's great. Um, advocacy and framing, the impact is the most important thing always. And, how do we continue doing that?
Hmm. 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 That's great.
Emily, can I add something about
Please.
calendar
Yeah,
considerations?
please.
One thing I'll say, and I think, Michael, are you the one who talked about struggling with we need to plan what our C4 is doing, but we also don't know what our budget is going to be, and so we're in this like chicken and egg whole
Yeah.
situation? I've definitely been in there multiple times, so I feel you, and it's not easy. One lesson I've learned, and if you're able to help like communicate this to your team, I think it might be helpful, is I have found one thing that's been true the last few election cycles is if a part of your plan will involve any sort of acquisition where you're trying to build your list, any sort of paid ads you might do are going to cost a lot more the closer you get to the election.
Yeah,
And being
that's right.
able to have people on your list longer. So I've definitely been in the space of wanting to bring people on for the year and knowing it would be better to do it at the beginning of the year. And then you're in this similar, like, well, how are we going to spend our money? What are we going to do? And it goes so much further if you can spend it earlier and have those people in who might be able to give and change your budget than trying to bring people in at a higher like cost closer to the election. So that's one
Yeah.
piece of advice I would give and something I've seen.
So we're national. We have like 5 states of impact, and we have grown our staff from 2024 of one full time to now 13, and you know we have a 57% revenue growth um goal, and I am sole owner of the growth, not the current funding, right? So
Got
it's
it.
a position that I'm meant to succeed in, and we have 3 fundraisers with a potential fourth. And luckily, our strongest giving base is Chicago, and that is going to be the one closest to Election Day that we're
Good.
having, right? That's a September plan. And we have right now 30 days about until our Miami, which
Mhm.
is our second strongest base. And so they had an end of year campaign that was like top 1% of like the participating organizations. And that was before I came in. And now the question becomes like, all right, we got to keep all these folks warm, measure our impact. We didn't have a documentary last quarter. We have a documentary this quarter. How can we use that to our advantage as a tool? And programmatically, we also have maybe $14,000 an hour worth of like high quality consultants when like we are all in the room together. So it's
Mhm.
like, how the hell can we program? Like, my vision is that we can programmatically work with orgs, you know, take in money as like an earned revenue stream from our leaderships or competency. And I always joke, like, listen, if we were to run a campaign, we could elect somebody president. Like, how do we put that in the most impactful way possible? Because right now we're
Mhm.
training organizers. Our core model is training young men to be good advocates and to care. But like we can also make candidates care,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we can make men better. And like I think with the shift of, our whole thing is like the core group of people that authoritarians are targeting right now, young men. you know, the most passive pro-choice demographic in the country, young men,
Mhm.
right? Of all of the people that are the highest cost of acquisition in media markets, 18 to 35-year-old
Hmm.
young men, right? And we do this stuff relationally. We are old school organizing tactics with new age young people who are really committed to the goal of engaging with other young men and going from passive to active. And we have a mission statement that hasn't changed in 11 years. And like somehow it's still a challenge and it's still really hard and it still isn't guaranteed to work.
Hmm.
Even though if you were to really sit down with a funder and even get an hour, you're going to get a yes.
Hmm.
right? And it's like, damn it, if my ED is doing 15% of his time on fundraising. Our founder is, both of our founders are amazing fundraisers, but they don't have time. Nobody picks up my phone calls. And it's like, we could be $100 million answer to Turning Point USA in 10 years, but we have to get there. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, I'm taking too much time. Please,
No, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Meredith, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for uplifting the fact that we have to ask. Um, I know like it's such a weird space to be in,
Yeah.
but as natives, because it's like we're asking philanthropy for money, that the only reason they have that money is because of stolen land
Yeah,
with stolen people. So I think at least in the spaces that I am in, it's really difficult for even some of my Black and brown relations to go into philanthropy and just make the ask,
sure.
which quite honestly, if we lived in a great system, we wouldn't have to do that. But it can be really difficult. So I appreciate you saying like to say the ask, because one thing that we've done that has been very beneficial that, we're trying to get up on our website is like your donation means this. And that was like our entry point. It's almost like a menu.
Yeah,
Um, because it's also very hard to ask when we look at like how like the funding reports out and it's small donor, it's like everyone donating, like regular people donating. And so
Mhm.
it's really hard to ask people, even from my own indigenous community who are already struggling social economically, like, hey, can you donate some money? Like, we don't like, I don't like to do that. It was a big thing for me to put a donation jar out by our coffee thing at our community center. So I really appreciate you hammering that home, at least for me in this space, that we have to be asking.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and we have to be and asking big. Like I have no problem asking big and reminding funders where their resources originally came from.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you for putting that out there because I know for some other organizations that can be really, really hard.
hmm
So thank you
hmm
for saying that.
hmm hmm thank you so much for sharing that. That's really helpful. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing we know about fundraising, right? Is until we ask, you know, a lot of people won't even think to give. Even if they love your organization, they may just assume that you have what you need. And we do need to ask. And to your point, ask big. That's right. That's right.
I love that you just said that. You have what you need because that's in our language in Anishinaabe and that's what Miigwech means. I have what I need.
Hmm. Oh, I love that.
Um, I would love to follow up the training I gave yesterday. We had someone say something similar, and she had a light bulb moment of, I feel comfortable asking people to volunteer, but
Mhm.
not to give money. And then, but there are some people who maybe can't, they don't have the time to volunteer, but they might be willing to give money. And so being able to ask in multiple ways, because not everyone can do the same thing. Yeah, it's a really important reminder.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I shared at the beginning, I came out of volunteer management and I was relatively young when I started and I had time. I had no money. I could volunteer. And then kind of as I've transitioned, I've realized it's good to ask for more than one thing because sometimes people can give money, sometimes people can give time. And there's a certain rhythm to our lives, right? When we have more time, when we have more money, and then when we have time again. But also, we know a lot of the research says if people give their time and their money, they're more likely to give both, right? They're invested. They want to be a part of it. So asking for more than one thing, whether it's advice, funding, time, attention, it really builds the relationship and it builds that culture. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Oh, yeah, we often ask to share. Absolutely, right? Michael, you were saying this, right? Like, how can you get people to pay attention? Sometimes you need somebody else, right? Whether they're sharing on social or they're making a call for you. Sometimes we do need someone who isn't us to make that ask. That's right. That's right. Guys, this has been such a great conversation. I'd love to hear from anyone else, either in the chat or on audio. What are you thinking as you're approaching, the rest of this year? Whether we've talked about it or not, what are some concerns that you have, or any questions you want to bring to this group? It's a great group with some great ideas.
So one thing that I've learned recently, I'm really trying to get my operations budget done. Okay. I don't know if there's,
Mhm.
I'm a small organization and we're one of a kind, but just getting the word out and the resources to do that. So one thing that I am really going to be standing on, because a lot of other organizations, I am not going to be your token native. Okay. And I've made that very clear in some of the spaces I'm in democracy spaces. So
Mhm.
one thing that I'm really standing on to assist with getting me my operational budget is when I have an organization come and be like, "Hey Meredith, will you guys help out with this election protection? Like we're doing a regrant of 60." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool. I'll do it for 260 because I need you to throw in my operations budget in order to do this." So I'm really standing on, especially some of these bigger organizations, like just calling it out and saying like, okay, cool, election protection, any like election sabotage, whatever they're, coining it this year. Really saying, yeah, I'll help you, but it's going to cost you this because I need my operations if you want the natives to be at the table. Because the other thing I've learned, and for some other organizations, really looking at some of those national organizations that are claiming you're a collaborator so they can receive that money.
Mhm.
So I'm like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. So I don't know if that's helpful to anyone else, but I'm really standing on that 10 toes down that you're not going to use McGuatch's name to say you're doing a collaborative when really it's so you can capture funds that you're then re-granting at a pittance. So really, really holding some of those other organizations responsible.
Mhm. Yeah, and being aware of your total costs, right? It's it costs money to do this work, and there's also opportunity cost. And so what do you need for that to be sustainable and something that you can grow? Yeah, that's great. That's great. I know we have some people who need to step off a little early. I may throw the link for the survey in just in case anyone needs to leave early. Not to rush anyone at all. We still have lots of time together, but I want to make sure we get everyone's great feedback. Um, what other questions or what else from today has really stuck with you? I'd love to hear. Actually, I think here's the question that I'd love to end us on is we've talked about opportunities, we've talked about vulnerabilities. I'd love us to maybe end on what's the opportunity you want to leverage this year? What's the potential that you're seeing? And do you need any help brainstorming on that?
All right, so I totally want to hold space for somebody else to talk, but you know me, I'm call time guy. I can go all day. I need help figuring out how the heck we have so many candidates.
Mhm.
C4 is a little weird.
Mhm.
What what like candidates come to us expecting endorsements, fundraisers, checks. We know that we have a broad appeal and can bring a lot of people in, but they want like a 1-to-1 split on fundraisers. And I'm like, yo, yeah, it's not cool. I do a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is similar to what we were just talking about is, what is the partnership model, right? And like, if you're going to be at the table, if any of us are going to be at the table, what are we bringing? What is our organizing power that we're bringing? And then how is that work and how is that funding shaking out? It sounds like that's happening a lot in this space of is the big name getting everything regardless of who's doing the work? Curious if anyone has a great example of, having those conversations. It's not dissimilar to funding education or funder education, excuse me. How are we having those conversations and, has that helped hold boundaries at all? But it sounds like it's a challenge for everybody. Yeah.
I now I feel like I'm right there with you, Michael. Um, I don't want to put people's business out there, but I will put business
Mhm.
out there. I had an organization that I'm still part of, that I'm on the board with, um, who was trying to capture funds and gave me a re-grant and then put my media specialist on as their staff so they could have a BIPOC person on their staff. Okay. Now, yeah, I know y'all shaking your heads like, what? That's real audacity. I want you all to know that I am a 5'5" Odawa woman. Okay. I am built like a Coca-Cola bottle, okay, but I'm real stocky, okay? So now imagine as I'm going into a bar, which also is not something I like to do as a native person with the harm of alcohol in my community. And I had to go in where a function was happening and I had to yell at a 6'6" man and take him down. And by the time I left that bar, I went back on their website and my staff member was removed. So holding a space like that and having no fear
Hmm.
about like what are the repercussions, like that is a true story. And so now I have to remind that person that it is a privilege to have me in this space
Mhm.
and that it is a privilege to receive funding because we are doing the work as Anishinaabe. And I remind him I'm not afraid to go into a bar to come and set you correct on your horse shit. So I think like that was like a really big boundary, but I also had to do it early in this space because I'm
Hmm.
only in my 5th year as Miigwech. And I had to do that early so then that way I wasn't taken advantage of by other organizations. And then it also put a pep in their step about what does representation really look like when it's led by predominantly um, people in a higher economic status, privileged white folk, like for lack of better way to say it. So that really set the tone for anybody else who is part of the global majority that we will not stand for that. So, because if this squatty little Odawa woman can do it, then anyone can do it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think this gets to, there's a whole other conversation around philanthropy and some of the things that we've said here today and some of the challenges, but also how do we operate in this space that has a lot of baggage and has a lot of history to it? And how do we work with donors and funders and hold our boundaries and, stay true to our mission and to ourselves when the funding outlook feels uncertain, right? That's really challenging. It's really hard work. Hmm. And how do you continue to be authentically yourself and make sure your organization stays true to itself and its mission and vision? That's all very challenging, especially when there's money on the line. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Um, I love it. One thing I was going to add in for folks, especially if you are doing anything more direct, because I know some folks on this call, you might just be fundraising in an election year. Some folks are working more directly in elections, and we talked about the resources out there for making sure you're staying compliant. One thing that I feel like not a lot of folks are aware of is there is a case in the Supreme Court right now that they've heard oral arguments, but it hasn't been decided yet. Could change some of the rules around firewalls, coordination, and expenditure limits.
Hmm.
So if your group is not, if you are in a space where that could impact you and it's not on your radar, I would start thinking about it. And we've been thinking about at
Hmm.
Progressive Multiplier Fund, if we may not be the right resource, but making sure we're able to get folks clear on, there's what the Supreme Court could do, and then there's what they might do, and who knows what sort of impact it
Yeah, I
could
would
have.
love to continue this conversation offline. I am dialed in right now. This is very interesting.
Michael, I'd be happy to talk one-on-one if you want to do the we I know Emily lifted up the one-on-one coaching that we can do, so would be happy to connect. Great.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
I do have a question,
Please.
and it's kind of like not related to the conversation that's happening right now. But something that Angelo from my team is also on this call. But something that stood out to us is the idea that like volunteers can be some of our best donors, and that's something that like our program team right now is really working on is building out our base of volunteers and creating like the infrastructure to have a volunteer program.
Yep.
And so I think something that I've noticed in our organization is that we tend to work in silos, right? So everyone's kind of focused on doing their own thing, their own piece of the work. But
Yep.
how, and so like if volunteers can be donors, how and at what point do we move like a volunteer to donor?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit here just because this is one of my favorite topics, but please, I would love to hear from the rest of the group as well. Um, so yes, all the research says, and my personal career says, people who volunteer and donate are the most engaged. And the more they volunteer, the more they donate. And the more they donate, the more they volunteer, right? Because once you've given money, you want to be more hands-on. You want to see where that money's going. These can also sometimes be our friends who maybe have a little more advice than we'd like, but that's okay. We can work with them. I think something to acknowledge here, especially as you're talking about silos, is are the people that we're working with, are our colleagues, what is their comfort level with fundraising and what is their trust level with fundraising? And the reason I say that is I've definitely worked with people who think once we get into fundraising, that's it. I lose my person, they'll be a donor, I'll lose all access to them, right? Or if you start asking them for money, you're just going to keep asking them, right? And just it's going to be like a constant ATM. So I think there's some education to do internally and there's some conversation to have around what does fundraising look like here? How do we work with our donors? How do we steward them? How can that be a huge plus to our donors, or I beg your pardon, to our volunteers? It's more information, it's more engagement, right? And then how do those systems talk to each other, right? Because if someone is both a donor and a volunteer, though we got to break down that silo a little bit, right? Because you can't be communicating with them all over the place. That person needs to feel like you're the same organization. So that's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity to bring those two silos closer together. But I do think, and this is someone who came out of volunteer management. I love volunteers. I went into fundraising. So many volunteer managers don't like fundraising, right? Feel like it's a terrible, terrible thing. It's so similar. It's so related, right? Here's this cause I care about so deeply. Please be involved with your time, your attention, or your money, or ideally all three. But I do think there's some internal communication to happen because what you don't want is for the volunteer program to feel like to be putting up barriers when it's all just a great opportunity. But I think it's all positive.
Mhm.
But it does require us to all work together. Yeah, yeah. But I'd love to hear from anyone else on the chat. Like, what have you seen in that space? Challenges, opportunities? I'd love to hear from you all. One thing I'll throw out here that I love to talk about is board members who are volunteers are our best donors. Always, always, always. And it's always interesting to me when people want to put up a wall there, and I'm like, but they're volunteering, and we expect them to both give and to get. So there's already a model for how this can work. And a lot of people silo their board and don't let the staff get to know them. And I think that can be self-fulfilling, right? Is no one knows the board. You have to let me get to know the board so I can engage them and involve them in everything that we do.
You're
But
like
that
speaking to my soul right now, guys. I appreciate this so much. It's like I had an hour-long conversation last night with one of our founders and everything. Like come speak at our executive committee meetings or something. Like
I had a joke, and I still do this. A lot of friends who are all in the same similar roles in fundraising, and we were like, "I'm just going to hire my friend to come and say the thing that I've been saying to my board because they'll listen to you, and we'll just. There's a
oh
funding
my
model in
God.
that. Oh, oh.
Well, if you're
Meredith, I love
DC
your point. Your board is
based,
your community.
you said you're DC based, Emily?
I am. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are you
So
in
you
DC as
can
well?
my boss is splitting time between DC and Miami, so he can go to New York more,
Hmm.
setting me up for success at the very least.
Yeah, our board is our community. So my board started off as community who was doing things with me, and then we
Mhm.
created McGuatch.
Mhm.
So that's how it started. And then I just had a board turnover just because of some of the social pressures and family
Yeah.
pressures last summer because of the current administration and how
Mhm.
that really affected our community in northern Michigan. So I've had a turn with that, but like my board actually has a tribal elected official on it also now. So
Yeah.
like my board, here's the other part that I think might be a little bit different is we actually provide a board stipend because we recognize our board is from our community.
Hmm.
And so our board gets a stipend and they have to commit 10 hours a month into work outside of our board meeting, only because we recognize the socioeconomic status of our community in order to participate. So for us to have a board that is 100% Indigenous run and we are run by people who identify as female, like that is really important for us. So like we don't ask our like I could ask my board to give us $1, right? But I also realize that that would not be a cultural thing that I would ever do. But our board is our community. And Diane, I think like one thing that we've done is we have volunteers that come or we have people who are participating in our programs on a regular. And then we show them how to do an elevator pitch, which ends up turning them into fundraisers. So I think that that is something you could do. Like an example of this that it was like way too long for me to type in there is we had people who would participate in our baby mock classes with some of our doula work. And they turned around and brought that to our local co-op. So like this month, we're part of the local co-op's Spare Change campaign. So they were talking about in their circles and at work. So sometimes the people who participate in our work are also our best fundraisers. So really looking outside the box. And, I understand that your organization might be different than mine. And, we're just these little natives all running around in Michigan. But it's a really great opportunity to then also grow your base of giving. And so fundraising might not necessarily be the person who's like collecting the checks or, telling people to get on Give Butter, but it can be those people who are amplifying that utilize your products. And I make them go all over. So like church gatherings, like I have the Interfaith Council working on behalf of me right now. So really it's part of your networks too for your so don't always think that your volunteers like part of their fundraising can just be spreading the word in a 5-minute elevator pitch.
Absolutely. And I love your point and thank you because this shows you some of my personal white glove philanthropy that like the people we're serving are also our ambassadors and our advocates and their stories and their connections are absolutely the future of the organization. Thank you for noting that. That's a great point. I also love your point about a board stipend because you're right, it takes time and attention and effort. And there's a reason a lot of boards look the way they do. So that's a great way to go about that. Thank you for sharing that. Friends, we've got about 15 minutes left together. I'm going to make sure that I share the feedback survey one more time. I'd also love to know, as you guys are kind of wrapping up, if there's anything that you've learned today that you're going to take back, if you want to throw that in the chat, just so we can kind of see, hold ourselves a little bit accountable today in the chat. But also, Kathy and I are here if there's any other questions or any other way that we can be helpful. Thank you all so much for your time today. This has been such a great conversation and such a great group. So I really appreciate you all spending part of your Friday together.